zur Hand. Vermehrt das Land, vermehrt den Wald, schafft Raum der Heimat, Raum den Erben.
As always in history, it's not what the experts say which matters, the scientists, the technologists, the theologians. It's how they put their ideals into practice in real life which counts. Here at Wewelsburg in the 1930s, a fantasy of German history was made concrete. The myth of medieval knighthood, of round tables and Teutonic knights. The myth of the male military order, austere and disciplined with its secret rituals. Merciless and moral, as Himmler said. But in all such myths of knighthood, there has to be a quest for knowledge, for power, and for conquest. The medieval Teutonic knights, in the end, failed in their battles against the Slavs. But their modern successors, the SS, armed with an ideology which was based on pure historical fantasy, would now embark upon the conquest of the East.
In 1939, the Germans invaded Poland. 2 years later, they struck at Russia. The promised Nazi empire to the east was in the process of creation. Vast swathes of territory fell to the Nazis. Vast numbers of prisoners were taken. While Nazi racial theory could afford to be lenient towards the conquered people of Norway or Holland, even France, now whole populations who could expect no mercy fell under German rule. Poles, Russians, Ukrainians, Jews. Behind the front line as it moved eastwards, the Nazi guardians of Aryan culture competed with each other to grab the cultural treasures of the conquered territories. As Allied intelligence documents reveal, the Ahnenerbe, led by its professors and scholars, went in for looting on a grandiose scale. From all over occupied Europe, scientific collections and libraries, archaeological finds, the contents of entire museums were shipped back to Ahnenerbe headquarters in Berlin, or to Himmler's castle at Wewelsburg. Himmler and Sievers founded a special unit, the Sonderkommando Young Kuhn, to supervise the plunder.
Man hat Museen dort geplündert oder Sammlungen sichergestellt, wie es hieß. Also die Chance, in ein völlig neues, bislang für Archäologen unbekanntes Terrain vorzudringen, war sicherlich bei diesen, die an der Ostfront beteiligt waren, der Hauptmotor.
Himmler at a prisoner of war camp in Russia in 1941. It is the curse of greatness, he said, that it must step over dead bodies to create new life. The professors, doctors and scholars of the Ahnenerbe now discovered that they too must share this curse of greatness. In October 1941, Sievers, together with a Luftwaffe medical officer, Dr. Russia, brought Ernst Schäfer, the leader of the Tibet expedition, to Dachau. They wanted Schäfer to photograph Russia's experiments on human beings. Through a small window, Schäfer was able to observe another of the Ahnenerbe's research projects. Years later, another witness would describe what Schäfer saw to a Nuremberg court. I have personally seen through the observation window of a chamber when a prisoner inside would withstand a vacuum until his lungs exploded. Some experiments gave men such pressure in their heads that they would go mad and pull out their hair to relieve the pressure. They would tear their heads and faces with their fingers and nails to maim themselves in their madness. They would beat the walls with their heads and hands and scream to relieve the pressure on their eardrums. These cases of extreme vacuums generally ended in the death of the subject. Worse was to come. In 1943, the Ahnenerbe sent a research team to Auschwitz. Details of this mission emerged in 1946 at the trial of Wolfram Sievers.
Witness, you are Wolfram Sievers and you were Reichsmanager of the Ahnenerbe, the Ancestral Heritage Society, were you not?
Ich war der Reichsgeschäftsführer des Ahnenerbes.
Did you ever hear of Hirt's, Professor Hirt's skeleton collection?
Es handelte sich hier um eine Angelegenheit der Anatomie der Universität Straßburg.
I asked you, did you hear about it?
Ich habe Ihre Frage nicht im Anfang verstanden.
You played an active part in the collection of those skeletons.
Nein.
This was just a piece of academic research, was it?
Jawohl.
Professor Hirt. His anatomy collection in Strasbourg had a skull collection of nearly all races and people, with the exception of Jews. The suggestion was made that there was an abundance of Jews in the concentration camps.
Where were you going to get the skeletons from?
Die Einzelheiten sollte Professor Hirt mit...
Now, just answer my question, witness, because you know perfectly well the answer to it. Where were you going to get those skeletons from?
Die sollten zur Verfügung gestellt werden aus Auschwitz.
It was Bruno Beger, the anthropologist from the Tibet expedition, who was to select the Jews for the skeleton collection and measure them while they were still alive.
Before they were murdered, they were anthropologically measured. That was all there was to it, was it?
Und Moulagen wurden von den Leuten genommen.
Now I want you to look at a letter which you sent to Brandt, headed the Ahnenerbe. Marked secret. It's addressed to Brandt, Himmler's adjutant. It's your letter, witness, isn't it? It's your signature at the bottom of it.
Jawohl.
I'll read it out. Following the subsequently induced death of the Jew, whose head should not be damaged, the delegate will separate the head from the body and will forward it to its proper point of destination in a hermetically sealed tin can, especially produced for this purpose and filled with a conserving fluid. Having arrived at the laboratory, the comparison tests and anatomical research of the skull can proceed. That was the report which you forwarded to Brandt.
The visit of Sievers and Schaefer to Dachau shows the connection between the theory and the practice of the Ahnenerbe, between the archaeological digs of the Sanskrit scholarship and the crimes against humanity. Schaefer's colleague from Tibet, Bruno Beger, would later go to Auschwitz to make face masks of Jewish prisoners. All of them protested that this was done for the purposes of science. The Allied officer who interrogated Sievers at the end of the war summed it up like this: "The Ahnenerbe's plan," he said, "linked the picking of the brains of contemporary historians and scientists with the picking of the flesh off the bones of the unfortunate victims whose skulls were needed as exhibition pieces, along with those who'd been dug up from their prehistoric resting places.
Many great scholars of international repute who worked for the Ahnenerbe. Do you think they knew about the atrocities that were being done by other parts of the organization? Did the historians and archaeologists know about this?
Yes, I'm sure they knew that. One has to see that each intellectual person in that time, and even within these roles that these archaeologists played, high-ranking SS officers that wore uniforms and so on, they were together in discussions within the council of the Ahnenerbe. Jan Kuhn was very near to Himmler, for example, so I know they knew that.
They knew.
And it is just a question of how we see that. How we see that now. Was it okay that they knew that? And they say it was because we took the chance to support our subject, our archaeology, and the other things we couldn't change.